But what I would say is leaders that are quick to blame others are not leaders. This is ultimately rolls up to me. I'm responsible. Here is my role in that. And here's what we're going to do about it. Leaders that do that, it works on every single level. Then you're really bringing in people that think they're going to get fired. They're going to want to double down for you.
So what's the reason you think a lot of companies see firing employees and firing at large numbers? We hear these news stories, Facebook lets go of 10,000. Even just locally, I live by the Nike world headquarters. They just laid off 700 people who work in that building. So, why do you think that's such a go-to option?
My answer, and I am not a politician and I'm not I'm really an entrepreneur. You're seeing that done primarily by publicly traded companies. It's a shareholder value priority, not employee. So you could say it's profitability, but long-term, I'd say getting rid of great employees is cutting blood flow and eventually you die. And then the other problem with that is, if you had that many, you could argue also if you're the employer that we had to trim the fat. We had a bunch of underperforming employees. Well, that's actually on you, not on them. You should have trained them up, manage them up or out, and you shouldn't have to lay off 10% of your workforce because you messed up and hired 10% of the wrong people and laid them off all at once. And then there's just how you do it. Sending, not necessarily Nike, but Tesla was a nightmare of people getting emails at midnight. Some didn't see it, went into work and their car keys or key passes didn't work. And it was just humiliating. And do you think they'll ever work for Tesla again? No. Do you think they're probably bad-mouthing Tesla? Yes. Is that expensive for the brand? 100%. So even how you exit somebody is as important as how you hire them. It's the entire employee journey is really one of my number one piece of advice to business owners is audit the employee journey to understand from that first time they hear about your brand and then apply in some way or reach out to get an informational interview to the day of the exit interview. What are the touch points? Where are the gaps? What needs to be fixed? And there is no company on this planet I can guarantee that has a perfect employee journey that has every step thoughtfully, artfully addressed and thought out, because you can't think of everything and no company is perfect. So there you go. But yes, the short answer is shareholder value is a priority for public companies. So they've learned what, Elon Musk showed, you can trim 80% of your workforce and still have a arguably functional Twitter platform. And others saw that and said, maybe I can do that. And it's kind of like shrinkflation. I think let's take advantage of inflation, shrink down our packaging, charge the same or a little more, and make, we're seeing record profits from large corporations. It is not about the consumer. It's certainly not about the employees.
So you talk about the employee journey, right? What are some things that you find some people get surprised by when you explain to them what that is? What are some of the differences between what the employee journey might be at a typical place of work? It could be a small business, could be a corporation. And what are some of the suggestions that you have to make that journey a little better for them?
So what I would say is it is not, I've done one presentation to a group of 8 business owners in San Jose that ranged in size through my group been a member of since '07 called Entrepreneur Organization, EO. And those 8 guys in San Jose represented employees from size companies from 7 employees to 1,600 employees. So they all had a different lens and a different set of needs and a different reaction to my presentation. My working title, culture of care, culture of caring, is that it is I believe, and not everybody that I like and respect agrees with me, but I do believe it's the employer's obligation to educate and align employees and train them up and manage them up or out. But what I found is that almost no owner or senior executive has a meaningful grasp on the employee journey. I was a 12-person. I averaged maybe 12 employees of the 20 years for the last probably 8 years. Before that, I maybe averaged 14. Sub 15 by design. And I was still not in charge of recruiting. I met with every employee once a month, and that was unusual. And it still didn't solve the retention issue as much as I'd like. So what I'd say is what I'm seeing is they're like, oh, yeah, this is an important concept. And then I'll give you just 2 examples. When I talk about the employee journey, that's like, oh wow, yeah, we've done the customer journey, we haven't done the employee journey. So that I picked that to start because it just sets a level that almost nobody is doing it right. One of my friends said she joined a company, a startup out of San Jose that has done an employee journey, but she hasn't been able to share it or get me in touch with their HR team to prove it. But nobody else I know has said, yes, we've done it, and here's what we found. And I'll give you another example is in my presentation, I give 10 recommendations of places to start. And one of them is a stay interview. Now, you may have heard of a stay interview in concept, but you may never have been a part of one. And in short is flipping the script of if I'm interviewing, if I'm your boss, a typical annual review is, hey, I'm looking at your performance and here's what you need to work on. You did this good. You need to work on that. Here's 3% raise, high five, lunch is on me. And then once a year, you're supposed to adjust, right? I'm a proponent of quarterly reviews. That's one of my other 10 recommendations. You can't adjust the ship once a year in terms of an employee and their performance and their motivation. So the stay interview is the idea of what can we do to keep you here? What are we missing? What's working? What's not working? Stop, start, continue kind of methodology. And so when I left a couple months ago from San Jose, the guy that brought me in, the group leader, said that next day he interviewed his top 2 employees. He's a 50-person electrician firm. He said it transformed their relationship entirely. From just coming, he just Googled. I have a blog post on PDX Mindshare on my website on what a stay interview is and how to do it. But he just Googled it, asked 3 or 4 questions, and they're like, oh my God, you care. You're asking me these questions and you're listening to my answers and want to make change. Like, I'm in, right? It just instantly transformed the level of engagement. So that's just one example. And that was a long question, so I don't know if I addressed everything.
No, that's great because it's highlighting a real need for change in that space. Is I think what what we're talking about here. So you talk a lot about the culture of caring, and I heard you mention that here a couple times. That's really important because I have a lot of friends who work for some of these corporations or work for some local chains, whatever it might be, and they complain about their boss, they complain about their schedule, they complain about how they're treated by management or from customers. There's a lot of unhappiness. And a lot of people in a lot of these positions. I'm lucky because I get to work for myself and I kind of get a little separated from what it used to be like when I was working a normal job. So I can relate to you when you say that's just it's not for us, right? But a lot of that is because of the experiences that we've had. I think the culture of caring makes sense because even the idea of having those above you care enough about you to make sure you're having a good experience, that goes such a long way. Even just knowing that they care. There's obviously steps that should be taken to prove that. But even just the idea of thinking that your manager has good intentions and truly wants to see you thrive, that makes a big difference. So can you tell me a little bit more about what that culture of caring is and what are some of the tangible ways companies can show that?
Yeah, so I alluded to a couple things, but I'll share one of my most important, and that is creating a consistent cadence of communication. There's a lot of alliteration there, but the idea is that what you're trying to do is increase transparency, reduce uncertainty, build trust. So I talk about a weekly through annual cadence in my presentation and so I'm not trying to make money off this. I'm trying to evangelize based on my experience. So I'm just, I just share some ideas and then I encourage my fellow entrepreneurs and business owners to go do it. It's not complicated. It just takes a good deal of commitment and discipline. So the first, I'll give you 2 examples. The first is the cadence is weekly status updates. So from my experience, I had a senior executive that I just trusted. Leah Iacocca said, hire great people and get out of the way, more or less. And that did not work for me. I hired great people and I got out of the way. Well, that only makes sense if they have clearly defined roles, no ambiguity in what their responsibilities are, and the chain of command. They have all the tools and training they need to be successful, and that is rarely the case. So what I ended up doing was putting people in a position. I said, you got this? And they said, I got this. And I say, if you need anything, let me know. And they promptly failed in their roles and spent, in some cases, months, in other cases, years covering up their deficiencies and threatening, in the case of my number 2 in command, threatening to fire people if they ever told me what was going on, with behind back channel, basically fear tactics. The day I found that out, I fired that person, and so I don't want to have a culture of fear. And so I kept hearing like, you're not approachable, we can't go to you. And then I finally figured out why years later was because they were threatened not to come to me. So instead of just blindly trusting, you trust but verify. So I then moved to my team would send me weekly updates, big wins, any stucks that they need help with, any other observations, and any movement towards their goals. And then they'd roll those up. Those are just me to just check, and they'd kind of rate their week, that past week, on the core values and some other performance metrics, just self-evaluate. And I was looking for gaps in that. Then every month they'd roll those highlights into a monthly update that touched on their progress toward their quarterly and annual goals. And they would update basically a PowerPoint, a template that I built. And they would update the, making progress in the short and medium term. And then on quarterly, we started doing reviews right before I sold the agency, quarterly reviews instead of annual, with goals towards progress towards annual and long-term goals, meaning plus 1 year goals, like 2 to 5 year goals with their careers. And so that way everything builds on the next, and it's not that much more work, a few minutes a week, really, or a day at the most. And so that informed and kept us that communication, trust but verify, right? It wasn't micromanagement. They were self-managing towards their goals. And then I would, offer support or need clarification to make sure they were tracking. So that's number one. So that all falls under the big umbrella, which is my number 2 recommendation, is develop what we call an IDP or individual development plan. You can just call it an employee roadmap. Every employee should have a roadmap for their role and their career at your organization, whether it's for weeks or for the rest of their lives. I don't know about you, but every place I first started out of college, I thought I was going to retire there because that's what my grandfather did at Boeing. RIP, both my grandfather and Boeing. But the idea is that, martini lunches and golf and equity, and they took care of their employees you never had to leave. My dad had 2 jobs as an architect. They took care of him. But I had 10 jobs in the first decade of my career, right? Just because of the timing, the mid to late 90s was the .com boom, and jumping ship wasn't that unusual. But I didn't care about an employee development or roadmap because I was busy, not trying to bump salary by moving around, but just busy, like I know what I need to do and we got to move fast. But what I missed when I came back into my job as a CMO, Chief Marketing Officer for the new acquiring agency, I never had a roadmap. So I didn't actually know if we were aligned on what my role was today. I had a rough job descriptions, accountabilities. I even pushed back on those because I didn't fully agree with them. We kind of got to a impasse on that. Okay, fine, I'll just move forward and do my job. But without a roadmap, I just didn't see, am I going to be here for a year or 10 years or till I retire? And in the end, I lasted 14 months. And a lot of that was a lack of roadmap, which meant a lack of alignment. And then back to the first recommendation was there was the cadence was not, it was, even though it was regular, it was not valuable. So that agency was on the entrepreneurial operating system, EOS, which is meetings, lots of meetings, and give me these 3 things and do this and do that. And it was so inhuman that I found it detestable, at least not in theory, but in execution. And I've heard that from other friends that are entrepreneurs that have used EOS or mainly have been a part of somebody else's implementation of EOS somewhere else. But I know others that love it. So it adds structure to an entrepreneur's shiny object syndrome or imposter syndrome. So it does solve a problem, but mainly for like manufacturer, blue collar type of businesses, in my experience, versus white collar, knowledge economy, service-based businesses. So working in cadence is important, whether you're EOS or some other operating system for your business. You need that cadence of communication.
That makes sense. Communication, because you want that clarity and security for them. You confuse, you lose, right? That's a very common marketing expression. And that works for anyone that you're communicating with. And if you have people who are working for you who don't know what their role is, don't necessarily feel safe in their job security or what the potential growth is for them in their role, it's how can you expect the best performance from somebody who feels that way? But if you do something like what you're talking about, if you're communicating more consistently, you understand what they want, they understand how they can contribute, because it goes both directions. right? You want to be able to contribute to them, and you want them to have the attitude of wanting to contribute to the company and to the customers as well. Because that way, both of you are thinking externally and not just about what you want, but how you can contribute. But you feel safe to contribute because you feel protected and secure at the same time. So yeah, all of that makes a lot of sense. You talked about the employee journey. You also briefly mentioned the customer journey, something more people are more familiar with. But do you have from this perspective of a culture of caring, how do you think that applies to the typical buyer's journey from a marketing context when we're getting outside of the team culture?
So I'll give you an example of where the parallels are between customer journey and employee journey is the all-important debrief, the post-mortem. When you lose a customer, in my case, a client that could be worth hundreds of thousands or in some cases millions of dollars a year in billings, if you're not doing a debrief, a post-mortem to understand what worked and what didn't work, why did we lose this client? Or in some rare cases, twice I fired my largest client over the years, and it was painful, but it was righteous and proper. So, but the debrief is important. And how many companies do a debrief when somebody leaves? I'd say probably less than 5%. Actually figure out what went wrong here, right? What went right? It's only a failure if you don't learn, right, from your mistakes or the mistakes of your employees. I had, we fired an employee because they changed their name, arguably under misrepresented who they were to cover their background. Basically, it was I would consider it fraud. But normally that's on once in out of a couple hundred employees over 2 decades. But you never know what's going to lead to a termination. But usually it's complex, it's emotional, and it's not easy to just contain they lied about who they were, right, or their experience. So I think the debrief is something that customer journeys, for retail doesn't really, it would be more like we lost a large account, but not necessarily retail customer, right? But for companies with large dollar value customers, for Nike, it might be Dick's Sporting Goods or something. Those are the things you need to brief. For White and Kennedy, it might be losing KFC or something like that. But do you do that for your employees? I don't think HR spends a lot of time worrying or at least evangelizing to leadership. We need to debrief on this. We do it internally. We want to do it with the team that, was affected by it. We want to do it with leadership so they understand if there are common threads of why people are leaving. People usually leave because of their manager or they stay because of their manager. I used to say, with PDX Mindshare, my networking group that I have since 1999, you can check out, we have a blog and webinars at pdxmindshare.com. But it's you either love the company and what they stand for, you love the people within that company. Let's say you don't care about the company and their mission and vision, but you love the people, or you love the product. But mostly it's just that direct, the person or people you work with most are, I think, the most determining factor, most common determining factor whether you will leave or stay is who do you work with day to day, and primarily your manager. My wife has an amazing manager at a local nonprofit, and she's flexible, she's understanding, she's empowering. I'm jealous. I feel like I had one or two semi-inspiring bosses, but mainly really terrible bosses that did not inspire, bring out the best in me. So again, auditing that would bring it out. So it helps when there's multiple layers, when it's just not me and everybody else. Is you need to decouple yourself from the auditing process and allow that information to come to light, and not be a Donald Trump about it, and put something on Truth Social about how that person sucks.
That's a big leadership thing. I don't know if you follow basketball much. Is that something you're into? So people have different opinions, but LeBron James gets a lot of criticism sometimes. Obviously, he's one of the best players we've ever seen. But in terms of being a leader, sometimes there's some pushback and criticism because he's very quick to assign blame on his teammates sometimes, and he's pretty quick to basically, reward himself when he thinks that he's performed very well. So how does that leave his teammates feeling at those times, right? So if you're especially if you're doing that publicly, it's one thing to obviously have a one-on-one with your team to talk about areas you can improve, but you never want to demoralize them, right? You never want to make them feel bad, especially in a more public setting, even if that's just around your other teammates or something more public. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, what if I can say something about that? I learned long ago that the quicker and the deeper you fall in the sword, the less blowback there is, the more credibility built. So Trump, LeBron, and others. I think Jordan was roughly in that space. What made them great athletes didn't make them great leaders. Some people might argue with that. That's my take. But what I would say, like great leaders, Dame was arguably a better leader than others, and he's also. It's interesting to see how he's playing with Milwaukee now. He's had to change up his game and his role, redefine his role. So, but what I would say is, leaders that are quick to blame others are not leaders. Leaders that are quick to blame themselves in a smart way, not an inauthentic way. Oh, it must be my fault. That's worse, right? But what I found is I was early in my career very resistant to admitting fault, just being human, and having my own faults. But when I started to lean in and say, this is ultimately rolls up to me. I'm responsible. Here is my role in that, if that needs to be said. And here's what we're going to do about it. What they call that, they're talking about that with the Trump trial is it's extracting the sting or something like that. Is you put up like, hey, Michael Cohen, you may not see him as believable because he's perjured himself. Well, he did that to protect. You control the narrative. The best example of that is Tim Allen. Used to have a show, right? I don't know if it was called Tool Time or whatever in the 80s, but he came out right as he was hitting his precipice and peaking. He came out and said, I'm a convicted coke dealer and I did time. And then what I did is I turned state's evidence and I brought in some big fish, and I'm not proud of my dealing. I'm proud of what I did to repent, and here I am, and here's who I am, and I'm moving on. And there was no story, right? It didn't break because he broke the story. There's nothing left. Took all the air out of the room. So leaders that do that, it works on every single level. If it's authentically, sometimes you have to reach to really think, I know this wasn't my problem, but my fault. But ultimately, it's your responsibility, and there's a subtle, important difference there. But if you say like, I'm sharing this with you, then you're really bringing in people that think they're going to get fired. They're going to want to double down for you.
That makes a ton of sense. Can that leadership go beyond your culture, your customers? Could it be in your industry or community? How can you elevate your leadership beyond that level to have some sort of influence, that goes beyond your company?
So that to me is built off of what I've been talking about as a thought leader. So I was just on a call yesterday with my alma mater, Western Washington University up in Bellingham. I'm on their advisory board for the marketing department, where I somehow managed to graduate. And so one of the things that we talked about is it's about alumni engagement. Classic. I don't know where you went to school, if you went to school or whatever, not judging, but we have very low engagement, very low spirit versus my two generations of my family previous to me went to University of Washington. I have friends that are Wazoo fanatics, Duck fanatics, some Beaver fanatics. They're a level down, right? But what we were talking about is there's 3 stages in your career: learn, earn, return. And what I believe is true leaders never stop learning, because if you decide I'm done learning, then I don't think you can be a truly good leader, because you need to be you always can be a better leader. I found out in the last minutes of my leadership role that I was still learning and growing, and I still am reading, and I'm still doing my thing. I've got this, Smashing the Funnel book I'm reading now. So you never stop. And then earning, why should you stop earning, right? And then, but the returning, goes to your question, is to extend out of sight of the walls is to return with your time. So I've been on boards for years. I was on the restaurant lodging board. I've been on, in terms of charities, Smart Reading. I was on their board for 7 years. I still have been a volunteer Smart Reader since 1999, so 25 years. So that is what helps. When you're out on a board, I'm probably going to join my son's high school foundation, for giving. They're like, after a fundraiser this weekend, like, can you join the board? I'm like, let me look at my time commitment. Okay, fine. So the goal is you get out there, and then if I was still Anvil Media, they would know, oh, Anvil, they cared. Oh, their CEO is out here all the time helping people. And, I was a co-founder of our trade organization, SEM PDX. I started PDX Mindshare back when I was neither particularly earning or notable, but I kept, not that it is now, but I kept with it for over 20 years. So it's getting outside of your world, and often getting outside your comfort zone is getting the word out that you're not afraid, and you're willing to give back, that you're selfless, and that hopefully paints the brand in a hopefully authentic way. We used to have mandatory volunteer days, charity of choice. We'd write checks, we'd give our time. So those are the ways to get out there, and I think it's important for all leaders to do that. And hopefully, it's not just an obligatory once-a-year golf scramble. That there's something a little more to it than that. Although I'm a huge fan of those because I don't have to keep track of my every single swing because I'm not a good golfer.
Gotcha. I've done a few of those myself. I used to play a lot more when I was younger. We might have to hit the link sometime if you're up for it. No, that was all great. Yeah, I think if you are really serious about trying to do more than just make a buck, right? Which is, well, I mean, we're in business, right? We want to earn. That's definitely part of it. But the returning part is important too, because if you believe in something enough, you don't just apply it yourself. You want other people to apply it too, because you want to make the world a better place, or you want to make your industry or your community a little bit better. We all want to contribute to that level, in some way or another. So I think everything you're saying makes a lot of sense. Especially if you start with your culture, you said employees over customers, which is something I kind of agree with. If you start with your employees and you have a great culture, you can extend that passion and that experience and that brand over into the customers, because they're the ones interacting with them. So that's 100% going to influence customers as well. And then if you have both of those going, the word's going to get around. You're going to get more references. People are going to talk about you. There might be influencers or news stories. The story's going to get out there because you've proven that you care. A lot of companies have mission statements and values and visions and things like that, but they're often very vague. And I was just doing some research before this actually about mission statements. And a lot of different articles will tell you how to write them so they sound good. None of them will talk about how to act on them so they're actually authentic. And so I think when you talked about those 3 layers of how you show that you care, I think that's where the actions are. Do you just say it or do you actually live it? Which goes back to the name of this podcast being Live Your Brand. It's something we're obviously both passionate about. So yeah, it was very great to get your perspective on that.
Thank you. Well, I'll leave you with this. One example, I think mission has limited value with beyond recruiting, and they come on board and they say, you're like, this is our mission, what we do every day. Here's our vision, where we want to go, but may never get there by definition. I've found managing by core values is far more effective. I made some major decision based on who we are. My quick rules on core values: no more than 3, because you're not going to memorize them, nor will your employees. And it's easier to manage based on 3 than on, I used to have 10. And I got down to 3, and then things really took off. It was clear to me, like, do we get this software, this laptop? Does it support our core values? Is it within it? Done, right? It made decisions so much easier. And the other thing is core values in action. Everybody understands. You used to have in our staff meetings kudos, weekly kudos. Who did something above and beyond us? Who wants to shout, a coworker out? And one thing that leadership should do is tie that action back to a core value. It could be the mission or the vision, but you should be doing that every day. It's the above and beyond is typically part of a core value, right? So, and I honestly think if your values are honesty and integrity, you're missing the point. That's table stakes. It really needs to be something unique that makes you different, not the same. And I just laugh when I see, a friend of mine is a branding guru, and he said, take large companies' taglines, invert them, and that's their largest problem. So the best example of that is Quest. Spirit of service and action. Can you imagine what kind of BS that is back in the day when they were still Quest? It's a joke. They don't care about their customers. So you could tell that if we say this, it will be true. Well, unless you start living it every day and firing people or chastising them for not living it, you're not doing it. You're just as lip service. And honestly, that does more harm than good to be inauthentic with your mission, vision, values.
Oh yeah, because employees and customers will feel that disalignment, and that it does the opposite of what they intended it to do. So absolutely. Kent, it was great talking with you today. Thank you so much for giving us your time and giving us awesome perspective, because everything you were saying came from experience, right? There's motivational gurus out there. There's people who try to talk about, what they think are good ideas from a marketing perspective based on stuff they've read, but you can always tell the difference between those who actually had the experience in the years and they actually had successes and failures and learned from those. So yeah, just value your experience, and really great to have you on, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, Jonathan, and look forward to getting on the golf course.
That would be great. Yeah, absolutely.